Hey guys, tonight we sink down into the frozen mud of the Ardennes forest. December 1944. You are a German infantryman, one of thousands scattered along the jagged defensive lines, shivering in your foxhole with frost forming on your eyebrows. The world is hushed, except for the creak of trees under ice and the occasional thud of distant artillery. It feels deceptively calm, like the forest is holding its breath. But if you've learned anything by now, it's that when things seem quiet on the front, that's exactly when you should worry. And, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The foxhole you crouch in is more than a dugout of dirt, it's your lifeline. The walls are reinforced with logs scavenged from the forest. You've even stacked old ration tins and a couple of helmets along the side, because at this point, any layer between you and a bullet feels worth it. You stamp your boots, trying to force some warmth into your toes. Snow has seeped down your collar, and your fingers are so stiff on the rifle that it feels like holding a block of wood for months. Foxholes have been the soldier's best bet for survival. When artillery shells slammed into the ground, they sprayed fragments outward, and those fragments usually flew above trench level, sparing the men who crouched low. The foxhole was your shield, the one thing that gave you a small edge against the constant pounding. But tonight, as the horizon glows faintly with the orange flash of American guns, you don't realize that your trusted hole in the ground is about to betray you. The first barrage comes in like thunder. You know the routine, the distant boom of American artillery, the pause of a few heartbeats, then the impact. Usually the shells bite into the soil, exploding in muffled blasts that toss earth into the air. This time, though, it's different. The explosion doesn't come from the ground. It bursts in midair, a deafening crack right above your head. You instinctively duck lower, but the shrapnel rains down vertically, like a storm of molten hail. For a split second, your brain refuses to accept it. Trenches and foxholes were supposed to be safe. That's what every sergeant drilled into you. Dig in, stay low, live longer. Now you feel the sting of metal slicing through the branches above, showering sparks into the snow. The dirt you thought would protect you is useless against gravity itself. Historians later would describe this as the debut of the proximity fuse in Europe, a tiny electronic marvel inside each shell that sensed when it was near the ground and detonated mid-flight, about 30 feet above target. It was as if the sky itself had turned traitor. Before, you were shielded by the earth. Now, you're exposed to the heavens. You glance sideways at your comrade Wilhelm, who is gripping the edges of the foxhole like a man clinging to a sinking ship. His helmet is tilted too far back, and you want to shout at him to duck, but your voice is lost in the roar of another airburst. The fragments hiss downward, striking the frozen soil like metallic rain. You smell cordite and pine needles crushed under shrapnel heat in quieter moments. Soldiers joke about artillery, calling it the king of battle. The joke, of course, is that the king never fights fair. You don't see the enemy's face. You just sit and wait to be smacked from miles away. One American veteran once described artillery as a giant with a hammer, swinging blind. But with proximity fuses, it feels like the giant suddenly opened his eyes. You press yourself deeper, curling like a child, trying to make your frame as small as possible. Funny, isn't it? You spend all these years training to be a strong soldier, and in the end, survival is all about shrinking, making yourself vanish into the mud. You even pull your scarf up over your ears. Not that cloth will help much against jagged steel. Still, it gives you the illusion of comfort, and illusions are all you have out here. Take, for instance, the rumor that foxholes could be lined with frozen potatoes for extra shrapnel resistance. Soldiers joked about it, half believing, half desperate. Someone even tried filling sandbags with snow, only to discover that snow melts when shells burst nearby. Who could have guessed? The artillery pauses for a moment. The silence is worse. You know another round is coming, but not when. Every nerve in your body is tuned to the faintest sound, the metallic click of a fuse, the whistling arc of an incoming shell. You find yourself holding your breath, as if being too loud might draw the next one down on you. Some historians argue that the proximity fuse was the single most decisive technological advantage the Allies had in the late war. Others disagree, saying tanks, fuel shortages, or sheer numbers mattered more. But you, crouched here in your pit, don't care about debates. You know firsthand how it feels to have the ground ripped away as a shield. To you, this little electronic gadget has completely rewritten the rules. Your mind wanders, oddly enough, to the sardine tin you tucked under your coat earlier. You planned to save it for later, maybe split it with Wilhelm if he asked nicely. The thought of greasy, salty fish clinging to the roof of your mouth almost feels comforting compared to the metallic taste of shrapnel in the air. Survival, it seems, is just a series of trades, your nerves for a scrap of food, your foxhole for a moment's illusion of safety. You lean your head back against the frozen wall of earth, the wood reinforcing beams grown above you, shrapnel having lodged in them like cruel ornaments. You're still alive, for now. But you can't shake the new fear that your foxhole has betrayed you. And this is just the beginning. The barrage doesn't stop. If anything, it feels like it's tightening around you, a drumbeat that grows sharper and closer with every passing second. You peek over the lip of your foxhole and spot it, the eerie signature of these new shells. They don't gouge craters into the ground. Instead, they burst in midair, sending jagged shards downward like confetti at the world's worst parade. You've heard of fireworks back home, but this is the cruel American version. Fireworks designed to kill. You drop back down, your breath steaming in the icy air, and for a moment you try to remember how artillery used to be. You think back to the Eastern Front, where shells thundered into the soil, chewing up the earth in violent fountains. It was horrifying, yes, but predictable. You could read the impact zone, feel relatively secure if you dug in deep. But now, it feels like the sky itself has turned into a weapon. One you can't dig away from. One of your squad mates, Ernst, shouts above the noise, "They're cheating. It's like they can see us hiding." He presses his helmet tighter onto his head, as if that thin dome of steel will shield him from death, dropping vertically. You want to laugh, bitterly, quietly, because you know the helmet is nothing against a rain of steel dot, and yet there's a strange comfort in gallows humor. Somebody mutters that if you keep your mouth open during the blasts, your eardrums won't burst. Someone else says you should lie face up so the shrapnel only scratches your nose instead of your back. Ridiculous, desperate wisdom born from men who have no other tools. You catch yourself almost chuckling. Almost. Here's the odd part. These proximity fuses weren't exactly brand new. The Americans had been experimenting with them since 1943. They worked by sending out tiny radio signals when the signal bounced back from the ground. The fuse triggered, detonating the shell in midair. Think of it as radar in a bullet. A brilliant idea, really, if you're not on the receiving end. British scientists had played with the concept too, but it was the Americans who brought it to the field in bulk. Some historians argue it shortened the war by months, saving countless Allied lives. Of course, from where you're sitting, it doesn't feel like it's saving anyone. You glance at your watch. Time has become elastic in this war. Minutes stretch into eternities between barrages. Hours vanish when you're scurrying for cover. The watch ticks steadily, but it might as well be laughing at you. You tug your coat tighter, feeling the fabric stiff with frost. The first real shock, though, comes not from the noise, but from the realization of helplessness. Your foxhole, your sanctuary, the very thing you've poured sweat into digging, is now a trap. The dirt walls that once promised safety now funnel shrapnel directly onto your back and shoulders. You dig deeper, but the deeper you go, the less chance you have of escaping if the walls collapse. It's the paradox of survival. The harder you try, the more you risk. Above, the trees are splintered. You can see branches dangling like broken arms. Each airburst scatters pine needles that drift down gently, almost beautifully, onto the wreckage. You imagine the forest groaning in sympathy, its tall guardians shredded by the invisible hand of American science. And here's something quirky. Some German soldiers later admitted they thought at first these were timed fuses, just set very precisely. The truth was stranger and more unsettling. The shells seemed almost intelligent, like they knew when to burst. You mutter a prayer, though not very loudly, because faith feels thin under a sky that seems to be hunting you. The psychological punch is worse than the physical. Every burst above makes you flinch, waiting for the sting of hot metal. Sometimes it doesn't come, and you feel foolish for ducking so low. Other times, it comes when you least expect it. A reminder that you're never in control. You can't help thinking about your family back home, how you promised them trenches and foxholes were safe. You almost wish they could see how wrong that promise turned out to be. The Americans keep firing, confident, relentless. You imagine them back at their batteries, warm gloves on their hands, working like factory men, loading, aiming, pulling cords. To them, this is routine. To you, it's the edge of existence. You grind your teeth, wishing you could strike back, but your rifle feels useless here. What good is a Mauser against the sky itself? Historians still argue whether this weapon really turned the tide at the Ardennes. Some say the German offensive was doomed regardless, thanks to fuel shortages and overstretched lines. Others insist the proximity fuse shattered morale, hollowing out units that might have resisted longer. From your perspective, crouched in frozen soil, with your heart hammering against your ribs, the debate is meaningless. You're living the evidence, and yet humans are funny. Even in the middle of fear, small details stick. You notice the way the snowflakes glow faintly in the bursts, like sparks settling in slow motion. You notice the rhythm of explosions. It's not random, not really. Every few seconds, another crack above, as steady as a metronome. You start counting between them, as if rhythm could offer control. You make it to 5 once, then the next one cuts you off at 3. Ernst nudges you, shouting, "We can't stay like this." He looks wild-eyed, his cheeks red with cold and panic. You nod, though you don't know what else there is to do. Where can you go? The foxhole is no longer safe, but the open ground is worse. It's like being asked to choose between drowning and burning. Still, you keep your head low, waiting for the barrage to end. That's all you can do. Wait. The Americans have the advantage, and all your training, all your digging, all your trust in the earth means nothing now. You wonder how long before everyone around you realizes the truth, that this is not just another bombardment. This is the future of artillery, and it has just arrived on your head. The storm rages on, and you brace for the next crack above. The first whispers about this strange new shell start long before you ever see it in action. Around the fire, in muttered tones between barrages, men talk about the Americans' latest trick. I'm Wonderwaff. Some call it, but not ours. There's a miracle weapon that seems to know when you're hiding. Nobody quite understands it. Some insist it's just better timing fuses. Others, more superstitious, say the Americans have found a way to make their shells think. You don't know what to believe. All you know is that when they explode in the air instead of the ground, everything you thought you understood about safety evaporates. In your training, artillery was a kind of math problem. Shells arc, they hit, they burst sideways. The answer was simple: dig down, get below the level of the fragments, and let the earth shield you. Foxholes saved lives from Stalingrad to Normandy. But this proximity fuses that rule inside out. The shell senses the ground, senses you, and detonates above. The fragments don't sweep horizontally anymore. They rain vertically. Suddenly your carefully dug foxhole is no longer your salvation, but a funnel. A place where steel shards can pour straight in. Historians later explained it with cold precision. Inside each shell sat a small device, no larger than a light bulb, containing a radio transmitter. As the shell flew, it sent out tiny pulses. When those pulses bounced back from the earth below, the fuse triggered, detonating the warhead about 30 feet up. The brilliance of it lay in its simplicity. Didn't need accuracy, just altitude. That little gadget turned every shell into an aerial minefield. Of course, in your foxhole, you don't think in terms of transmitters or circuits. You think in terms of survival. You think in terms of whether the next burst will shred the tree above you or pierce the mud wall at your back. The men around you share the same wild-eyed look, disbelief mixed with dread. Foxholes had been the one place you could feel a scrap of control. Now that illusion has shattered. A quirky story circulates through the line, probably nonsense, but you cling to it anyway. Supposedly, the British first tested these fuses by firing at balloons, celebrating like children when they burst in the air. Balloons. You picture a group of engineers cheering as fabric collapses, never imagining that on the other end of their invention, men like you would be crouched in mud, convinced the sky itself had turned traitor. The image is absurd, almost comical, and yet you can't shake it. Somewhere, someone laughed at balloons popping, and now you hunch here, waiting for shrapnel. The first time you experience a true airburst, it doesn't feel real. The explosion comes not from the ground, but directly above, a concussive crack that makes the air itself seem alive. Branches splinter, snow erupts upward, and shards of hot metal fall like hail. You press yourself deeper into the hole, but it doesn't help. The fragments bite downward, finding every angle, slapping the soil beside your helmet. You feel the sting of dirt and sparks against your face, and realize the foxhole has betrayed you. You try to reason with yourself. Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe the fuse malfunctioned. But then it happens again and again. Each time, the same pattern. Whistle, crack, shower. Soon you stop hoping for exceptions. This is the new normal. The Americans have changed the rules, and your hole in the ground is now a bullseye. Some of the older veterans shake their heads, muttering that there's always a new weapon, always a trick meant to break men's confidence. They remind you of the first time tanks rolled across the trenches in 1916. How soldiers panicked until they learned to fight back. Maybe, they argue, this too will pass. But deep down, you sense it's different. A tank you can see. A tank you can shoot at. But how do you fight the air itself? The debate among historians rages on long after the war. Was the proximity fuse truly decisive? Or just another factor among many? Some argue it saved Allied lives, shortening battles by blasting dug-in defenders out of their holes. Others say Germany was already running out of fuel and men, that no fuse, no matter how clever, could decide the outcome alone. You crouched under its fire. Know the answer in your bones. It doesn't matter whether it decided the war, it decided your night. It decided how safe you feel, how much you trust the earth, how you look at the sky. Fear takes new forms under these barrages. Before, you feared the ground erupting, dirt flying, craters gouging the earth. Now you fear the quiet space above your head. You find yourself flinching at snow, falling from a branch, ducking at the shadow of a bird. The air feels haunted, a ceiling of knives waiting to fall. Sleep becomes impossible. Even in silence, you hear phantom bursts, your body bracing against impacts that never come. And yet, humans are strange. Even in the middle of fear, you find yourself noticing details, the way sparks drift slowly, almost beautifully, through the smoke. The way snowflakes cling to your coat before melting into dark stains. The way each burst echoes differently, depending on how the trees absorb the shock. You memorize these things as though cataloging them gives you control. It doesn't, but it feels like something. The proximity fuse has changed, not just the battlefield, but the soldier's mind. You no longer crouch with confidence. You crouch with dread. You no longer think of your foxhole as safety, but as a place where death might pour straight in. And once that thought settles, it never leaves. In the distance, you hear another round fired, the faint rumble carrying across the snow. You know what comes next. You don't even bother counting seconds anymore. You just wait for the crack in the air, the shower of sparks, the hiss of falling steel. And when it comes, you curl tighter, hands over your helmet, whispering the only truth you know now. The sky itself has joined the enemy. The first full barrage catches you in a way that no drill, no lecture, no whispered warning could ever prepare you for. You've spent days digging, reinforcing, freezing your fingers against the iron earth to make your foxhole deep and narrow. Every instinct told you that the ground was your armor. But when the American guns begin their furious roar, the protection you've trusted suddenly turns on you. The whistling descends quickly, followed by a thunderclap not on the ground, but above your head. For a second, you're disoriented, your ears filled with a sharp crack that seems to tear the night sky itself apart. Then the world rains steel. Shards slice down vertically, pattering on helmets, ripping through branches, striking dirt and wood with a hissing, furious energy. You throw yourself flat, pressing your face into frozen soil, but you know it doesn't matter. The fragments don't care how deep you dig. Wilhelm curses beside you, voice high and panicked. Gott im Himmel. His words vanish in the next blast. A pine tree above snaps like a matchstick, showering splinters. You want to reassure yourself that this is just bad luck, that maybe the shells are set wrong. But you've already heard the rumors. These are no mistakes. These are proximity fuses, clever American devices that make your foxhole a death trap. The betrayal is the hardest part to swallow. You've been told since your first day in uniform, dig in and live longer. Every sergeant barked it, Every manual stressed it. You believed it with the devotion of faith. Now, with hot steel dropping through the air, you feel as though the very earth has sided with the enemy. You clutch your helmet tighter, a meaningless gesture, and pray the shards will hit dirt instead of flesh. The barrages come in waves. 1 minute, the sky is a thunderous storm of airbursts. The next, it is eerily silent. Those pauses are worse than the noise. In the silence, you tense, flinch at every twig snapping, waiting for the next strike. Your nerves pull taut like wires, ready to snap when the next volley comes. It almost feels like a relief. At least you know where the danger is. Historians would later dissect this moment with calm words. They'd talk about how the proximity fuse gave Allied artillery a decisive edge, how it stripped away the advantage of entrenchment, how it saved infantry countless lives by clearing German defenders out of their holes. Some would argue it was one of the war's most important technological leaps. But in your foxhole, the words don't matter. You aren't thinking about strategy or innovation. You're thinking about survival, about whether the next burst will finally find you. Quirky bits of soldier folklore surface even here. Someone swears that if you lie on your back with your mouth open, the shock waves won't burst your eardrums. Another insists you should curl up sideways, so fragments will pass over. A few even joke about putting mess tins over their helmets for extra armor, the rattling making them sound like hollow drums. You laugh once, short and bitter, then stop. None of it will really save you. But clinging to scraps of superstition is easier than admitting there's no defense. The foxhole itself feels transformed. Before, it was your haven. You had taken pride in its neat walls, in the logs braced across the rim. Now you see it differently. It's too narrow to escape fragments falling directly down. It channels the rain of steel straight toward you. You dig at the walls with your numb fingers, trying to go deeper, but each blast drops dirt back in, undoing your frantic work. You pause, exhausted, and realize the hole is slowly becoming a grave. Another shell bursts close, so close, you feel the heat kiss your cheek. Dirt sprays across your back, sharp with gravel. Wilhelm yells something incoherent. Ernst clutches his cross, whispering furiously. You try to steady your breath, but your lungs refuse. Seizing with every fresh concussion, it dawns on you that this is more than just killing. This is about breaking minds. Before proximity fuses, you at least felt a measure of control. Stay low, dig deep, wait it out. But now there's no tactic, no adjustment that feels safe. The enemy hasn't just found a way to wound your body. They've robbed you of your only refuge. The historians will continue to argue whether this weapon shortened the war, whether it was decisive or simply one more nail in Germany's coffin. But you've already made up your mind. For you, crouched here with your face in the mud, it doesn't matter what scholars conclude. You know what it feels like to have your shield stolen, your doctrine turned against you, your foxhole transformed into a death trap, and still you endure. You press your face lower, you squeeze your eyes shut, you wait for the fragments to miss just a little longer. Endurance becomes the only tactic left. When the next barrage finally pauses, you dare to lift your head. Smoke drifts like mist. Snow falls in soft flakes, indifferent to the carnage. For a moment, the silence feels like grace, but you know it won't last. The sky has changed, and you will never trust the ground again. You begin to notice something unsettling about the new shelling, the way it has rhythm. Every few seconds comes the whistle, then the violent crack overhead, then the long hiss of fragments tearing downward. It repeats and repeats until your mind starts tracking it like a metronome. You even find yourself counting in a whisper: 1, 2, 3, crack, as though predicting the burst might somehow soften its blow. It doesn't, of course. The fragments still come, slicing branches, hammering helmets, punching into dirt walls. But the counting gives your hands something to do, your voice something to cling to. The shrapnel really does fall like rain. That's the strangest part. Not a sideways spray, not earth exploding from below, but a vertical shower, hissing and pattering with a sound almost delicate, like hailstones, except each one is hot steel. You curl tighter, pressing your knees to your chest, trying to make yourself as small as possible, and still, the fragments find their way into every corner. Some bounce harmlessly, some lodge deep in wood, some strike with sharp sparks against metal. You realize you will never hear rainfall the same way again. Wilhelm mutters, curses, his hands white-knuckled around his rifle. Ernst, always the eccentric, lies flat on his back, coat pulled over his face, mumbling that if he's hit, at least he won't see it coming. His voice cracks with forced humor, and you almost laugh, but it catches in your throat. Humor feels like a brittle shield, too fragile for the storm above. Still, you don't tell him to stop. A joke, even a bad one, is better than silence. The fear of the next shell becomes worse than the shells themselves. You can't rest, can't breathe fully, can't unclench your jaw. Every pause feels like a trap. When silence falls, your ears strain and your body tenses, waiting for the next crack. You know it will come. It always does. And when it does, you flinch, even if the fragments don't land anywhere near you. Your body reacts, whether your mind wants it to or not. Historians would later call this the psychological multiplier of proximity fuses. The weapon didn't just make artillery more lethal, it made foxholes feel unsafe. And once soldiers lost trust in their cover, fear multiplied. You're living proof. You don't even believe in the dirt anymore. Each shell feels like proof that the laws of survival have been rewritten. Somewhere nearby, a man begins to sing. His voice is cracked, shaky. But you recognize the tune, Lily Marlene, the song every soldier seems to know. It drifts strangely across the bombardment, carried on the cold air. You find yourself humming with him, softly, beneath your breath. The melody doesn't stop the shrapnel, but it makes you feel less alone. For a few moments, the rain of fragments feels less like the end of the world, and more like a storm you're enduring together. The quirky survival tricks continue. A man to Foxholes over has jammed his mess tin onto his helmet, insisting the double layer will protect him. Another sprinkles snow across his coat, claiming it makes him less visible from above. You scoff silently at the ideas, but then catch yourself smoothing snow over your own helmet. Superstition is contagious, and in the face of airbursts, logic feels like a luxury. One blast lands especially close. The shockwave rattles your chest, steals your breath, and sends dirt cascading into the hole. A fragment strikes the rim with a metallic ping, showering sparks across your sleeve. You slap at it instinctively, heart hammering. When the noise fades, Wilhelm lets out a nervous laugh, pointing at a dent in the bread tin he'd hidden under his coat. "Saved by rations," he mutters. It's absurd, but the laughter spreads for a moment, brief relief in the storm. The barrages stretch on, endless. You lose track of how many have passed. 10, 50, 100. Time no longer moves in minutes, but in bursts and pauses. Each lull feels like an age, each salvo like an eternity compressed into seconds. Your nerves fray with every cycle, until you wonder whether you'll snap before a fragment even finds you. Historians later debated whether this constant shelling was wasteful. Some argued the Americans fired too many rounds, flooding forests with more shells than necessary. Others insisted it was deliberate strategy, designed not just to kill, but to exhaust, to hollow out morale. You know which side is right. The Americans don't just want you dead, they want you broken long before death arrives. And yet, even here, you notice beauty in strange places. Sparks drift through the haze like fireflies. Snowflakes still fall, white against the smoke. Branches glow faintly in the bursts, scattering light across the frozen ground. It's eerie, almost magical, and for a moment you forget to be afraid. Then the next shell cracks above, and the magic disappears. The shrapnel falls again, like endless rain, and you curl tighter, whispering numbers, waiting for the storm to pass. The silence fools no one. You've been on the front long enough to know that quiet is only a trick, the battlefield's cruelest joke. Still, you savor it. You lean your head back against the frozen wall of your foxhole, letting your eyelids droop. The snow has begun to fall again, each flake spinning lazily, defying the chaos that scarred the sky minutes ago. It feels almost peaceful, but that peace is thin, brittle, ready to break with the next shell. For weeks, your officers drilled into you the idea that foxholes were safe. The earth will shield you, they said. Yet now, crouched in mud that no longer protects you, you realize how naked you are. The proximity fuse has stripped away the one defense every soldier trusted. Even helmets, sandbags, logs all feel ridiculous against shrapnel falling vertically. You glance at your greatcoat. It's thick, woolen, heavy enough to weigh down your shoulders. But it may as well be made of paper. Vulnerability becomes a living thing beside you. You can feel it pressing against your ribs, whispering that no movement will save you, no clever trick will outwit the sky. Wilhelm voices it aloud, his voice trembling. It doesn't matter how deep we dig. He says it like a confession. You want to argue, but you can't. You've seen the fragments pepper the bottom of foxholes, slicing through anything that hides there. You know he's right. Historians would later describe this as a revolution in artillery, a moment when the balance between protection and destruction shifted. Before, soldiers could always adapt, dig deeper, build stronger bunkers, improvise defenses. But the proximity fuse erased that equation. Now the question was not how to protect yourself, but whether protection existed at all. Some scholars still argue whether German engineers could have countered it, if only they'd had more time. Others insist nothing could have been done. You, kneeling here in the dirt, believe the second camp. And it's not just the physical danger. It's the way fear seeps into your bones. You can feel it corroding discipline like rust. Men around you grow silent, then restless. Their eyes dart skyward, scanning for flashes. Even in lulls, no one relaxes. The foxhole feels smaller by the hour, its damp walls pressing in. You realize the psychological war is just as vicious as the artillery itself. A quirky detail surfaces in your mind, something a sergeant mentioned back in training. He claimed foxholes had saved more German lives than any single piece of equipment, even helmets. It felt comforting at the time, like the ground was an ally. But tonight, that statistic feels like a cruel memory. Numbers mean nothing when science rewrites the rules. The forest groans under the strain of bombardment. Pines lean at awkward angles, their roots clawing the soil. Smoke clings to the ground, mixing with fog until the air tastes bitter. You pull your scarf higher over your mouth, but it only filters the smell, never removes it. Every breath reminds you where you are. The irony is sharp. you used to long for cover. On the march, under strafing aircraft, you prayed for trenches, holes, bunkers. Now, pressed into your dugout, you almost wish for open ground, if only to feel you had choices. Vulnerability is not just being unsafe, it's the knowledge that you cannot change your fate. Another barrage begins, sudden and brutal. Shells burst above, showering sparks and fragments. You flinch as metal ricochets off your helmet with a sharp ping. Your teeth clench, your hands shake. Wilhelm presses so tightly against the wall, you fear he might fuse with the dirt. Ernst mutters again about lying face up, his voice almost hysterical. Fear makes men invent strange rituals. You notice your hands tracing the grooves of your rifle stock. Though you know it's useless here, the weapon feels like an anchor, something familiar in a storm that has stripped away every other certainty. You remember learning to fire it, the smell of gun oil, the pride of marksmanship. Now you cradle it like a relic from a world that no longer exists. One shell bursts particularly close. The concussion punches your chest like a giant's fist. Dirt showers down, mingling with snow, and you cough, spitting grit from your mouth. For a moment, you think you've been hit, but no, it's only the shock. You thank the mud wall that still stands, though you no longer trust it. Historians often ask, what broke soldiers first, the cold or the shells? Some claim it was hunger, others say fatigue. But sitting here, shrapnel falling like iron rain, you realize the answer is vulnerability. The knowledge that you are naked, even in your supposed sanctuary. Tears deeper than hunger ever could. Oddly, you find yourself thinking of home. You picture your family eating supper, bread steaming on the table, the radio humming faint music. You imagine telling them, the Foxholes betrayed us. Would they even understand? They might nod politely, but only men who crouched under airbursts will ever grasp the full weight of that sentence. The barrage slows again. The silence feels heavier now, not comforting, but expectant. You rub your temples, your fingers raw from clenching too long. Around you, men stretch cautiously, like animals testing the air after a storm. The relief is muted, tempered by the certainty that it will start again. You think back to earlier wars, when trenches saved lives in France. Foxholes were born from that logic. But every war invents its own rules, its own betrayals. This one has decided the earth itself is no longer enough. You stare upward into the dark canopy, broken by smoke. Somewhere beyond, stars wait, indifferent and steady. You cling to that thought, that above the haze, above the blasts, something constant still shines. Fragile comfort, perhaps, but in a world where your shield has failed, even fragile comfort feels like salvation. For now, you remain crouched, vulnerable, waiting for the next storm to fall. The Ardennes feels endless. Snow and pine, broken only by the flash of guns and the groan of dying trees. You sit in your foxhole, knees stiff, and listen as the Americans keep up their rhythm. Their shells burst again, higher this time, spraying light and metal into the forest canopy. It's not just you who feels the pressure. The entire line trembles under this new reality. When the offensive first began, there had been a fierce kind of optimism. Orders shouted, engines roaring, the promise of pushing the Allies back toward the Meuse. The Battle of the Bulge, they called it later. But in the foxholes, it doesn't feel like a bulge, it feels like a trap. Like the forest itself is folding in around you. You hear voices between barrages, not German this time. Carried on the cold air, faint but unmistakably American soldiers, talking, laughing even. Their tone is maddening. They sound confident, almost casual, like men sitting around a stove. Their artillery pounds your lines, while their voices drift easily through the woods, as if this is already decided. You grit your teeth, jealousy biting harder than the cold. The Americans' confidence isn't baseless. Their guns never seem to tire. Every few minutes, another series of bursts shakes the ground. The precision is uncanny. It's as though they can see you, as though they know exactly where your foxhole lies. You duck instinctively, feeling the next rain of fragments hiss down. You want to believe it's luck, but deep down you know better. Here's a fact you once overheard. American supply lines were monstrous things, feeding artillery with endless shells, fuel, and food. German officers joked bitterly that the Americans waged war by conveyor belt. And now you see the truth of it. They fire and fire, as if their warehouses are infinite. For every ration tin you clutch, they have 10. For every bullet in your pouch, they have a crate. A quirky rumor circulates among your squad. Some soldiers claim the Americans can afford to fire proximity shells casually, wasting them just to break morale. Ernst insists each shell costs more than a farm back home, but the Americans don't care. Whether or not that's true, the idea gnaws at you. The thought that the enemy can spend lives and treasure so freely, while you crouch hungry and cold, makes you feel like a beggar at war's table. The Ardennes winter sharpens it all. Your breath fogs with each exhale, and your toes feel like stone. Snow crusts over your helmet, giving you the look of a statue more than a man. You scrape it off with numb fingers, but it returns almost instantly. The cold isn't just discomfort, it's a weapon. Frostbite whispers at the edges of your awareness, promising to claim you if the shells don't. Historians still argue about the Ardennes offensive. Some say it was Hitler's last gamble, doomed by overconfidence. Others believe it nearly succeeded, that American lines bent dangerously before recovering. But for you, in this foxhole, the debate doesn't matter. You know only the reality. American voices, confident and relentless, paired with artillery that robs you of sleep and safety alike. Between bursts, Wilhelm mutters. Do you hear them? They sound like they're at home. His face is pale, lips cracked from cold. You nod silently, unwilling to admit how much those voices haunt you. The enemy shouldn't sound relaxed. The enemy should sound afraid. But they don't. Toad tots back to the line. Orders had been clear: hold your ground, dig in, resist. The Ardennes terrain was supposed to favor defense. The thick forests, the narrow roads, perfect for ambush, perfect for slowing the American advance. But all of that collapses when the sky itself rains steel. Foxholes dug with frozen fingers become traps. Ambush positions shredded before you can fire a shot. You wonder about the Americans beyond those voices. Do they laugh because they trust their artillery? Or because they know you can't strike back? Perhaps both. You imagine them hunched over stoves, stirring tins of beans, while you gnaw on cold bread that crumbles like ash in your mouth. The comparison burns worse than the cold. Then the shells come again, shaking the forest. One bursts directly overhead, and a fragment cuts across the rim of your foxhole, showering sparks into the dirt. You press yourself lower, ribs aching, as the air fills with the high whine of shrapnel slicing through branches. It's too close. Every nerve in your body screams that you should be dead already. The sky flashes orange, then fades. Smoke drifts, carrying the acrid taste of gunpowder. Wilhelm coughs violently, his body racked with spasms. You slap his back, more instinct than aid. He gasps for breath, eyes watering, then grips your sleeve with surprising strength. They'll never stop, he whispers. You don't know whether to agree or lie. There's a saying among soldiers, artillery kills the body, but fear kills the spirit. Tonight you feel both pressing down. Your foxhole is too small to contain the dread, too shallow to shield the truth. Each shell writes another line of despair across the snow, and yet, somewhere in the distance, you hear laughter, again American laughter. It cuts sharper than the shrapnel. You close your eyes, pressing your hands over your ears, but the sound seeps in anyway. It is not the laughter of men fighting for survival. It is the laughter of men certain they are winning. Historians may analyze strategies, debate fuel shortages, chart advances on maps, but here, under this sky, you feel the battle distilled to its essence. One side confident, the other crumbling. You crouch in your foxhole, cold and trembling, knowing the Americans are out there, ested, supplied, unshaken while you wait for the next burst to turn your shelter into your grave. The barrage slows again, but the confidence of those voices lingers in your ears, more dangerous than the shrapnel itself. The sky no longer feels like sky. It has become a ceiling of smoke and flame, closing in over your foxhole. The shells burst above, leaving trails of dirty gray clouds that mingle with the snow. In daylight, you would see blue. Now, even in the pauses, the world overhead is nothing but haze. The Americans have painted it with fire, and the Ardennes forest has accepted the color. You press yourself deeper into the earth. The ground is frozen, yet sweat beads along your neck. Each blast above showers down sparks that hiss in the snow. The light is sharp, unnatural, as if the heavens themselves are cracking open. The longer you stare, the darker it becomes, smoke smothering the weak glow of the moon. The forest is no longer the sheltering green you knew, but a charcoal cage. Wilhelm breaks the silence. The sky is dying, he whispers. His words are absurd, yet they make a cruel kind of sense. Every burst above carves new wounds into the night. The canopy has holes now, where stars used to shine. Even when the barrage pauses, smoke lingers, blotting out constellations you once navigated by. You realize you cannot remember the last time you saw a clear horizon. Historians describe this transformation clinically. They write about how artillery fire filled the air with smoke, how tree bursts made dense forests unlivable. They talk about visibility, about how commanders struggled to see positions through haze. What they cannot capture is the feeling, the suffocating weight of a sky turned hostile. You are not just being shelled, you are being smothered. The strange part is how quickly your senses adapt. At first, the sudden flashes blinded you. Now your eyes expect them, flinching before each detonation. The darkness feels thicker afterward, pressing on your pupils. Your ears, too, have adjusted. The blasts no longer shock as much as the silences between them. Silence is heavier, almost unbearable. A quirky thought flits across your mind. You once read a tale where Norse gods split the skull of a giant to make the heavens. Tonight you feel as though the reverse is happening, that some unseen hand is splitting the sky to drop shards of bone onto you. War has a way of making mythology real in the worst possible sense. Ernst mutters something about digging deeper, but even he doesn't move to start. You all know it's pointless. The shrapnel falls vertically. Depth won't matter. The foxhole that once promised safety now feels like a funnel, directing every fragment inward. You imagine the Americans smiling across the line, proud of how they've turned your shelters into traps. The smoke thickens. You taste it on your tongue, acrid, bitter, clinging. Every breath scratches your throat. You pull your scarf higher, but it only filters, never removes. The forest itself seems to be dissolving. Trunks, split by blasts, smolder faintly, glowing embers against the snow. Branches hang like broken limbs. You can no longer tell where earth ends and air begins. Somewhere in the haze, a comrade cries, out sharp, sudden, then cut short. You freeze, heart pounding, but the voice doesn't return. The silence after is worse than the scream. You exchange a glance with Wilhelm. His eyes are wide, reflecting the dim flashes, and you know he's thinking the same thing. It could just as easily have been you. The debate among historians often turns to morale. Did the proximity fuse break the German spirit more than tanks or aircraft? Some argue, yes. Others say, morale was already brittle. But here, crouched under the darkening sky, you feel the truth in your gut. This new weapon doesn't just wound bodies, it wounds hope. You stop believing in survival, even in silence, and yet oddly, your mind searches for beauty. You notice how sparks drift through the smoke like fireflies. You notice the snowflakes, still falling, stubbornly white against the soot. You notice how the orange glow of bursts reflects in ice crystals, scattering tiny rainbows across the ground. For a heartbeat, it almost looks magical. Then another shell cracks open, and the magic is gone. Wilhelm mutters, "The Americans have stolen the sky." His words stick with you. You repeat them in your head, almost like a chant. It explains everything. The sense of exposure, the suffocating dread, the endless gray above. The Americans own the heavens now, and you are trapped beneath. The night drags on, endless. The flashes keep coming, sometimes near, sometimes far, but never gone. You crouch, eyes burning, ears ringing, your body trembling with exhaustion. The sky stays dark, and you know it will never feel safe again. The sky no longer feels like sky. It has become a ceiling of smoke and flame, closing in over your foxhole. The shells burst above, leaving trails of dirty gray clouds that mingle with the snow. In daylight, you would see blue. Now, even in the pauses, the world overhead is nothing but haze. The Americans have painted it with fire, and the Ardennes forest has accepted the color. You press yourself deeper into the earth. The ground is frozen, yet sweat beads along your neck. Each blast above showers down sparks that hiss in the snow. The light is sharp, unnatural, as if the heavens themselves are cracking open. The longer you stare, the darker it becomes, smoke smothering the weak glow of the moon. The forest is no longer the sheltering green you knew, but a charcoal cage. Wilhelm breaks the silence. "The sky is dying," he whispers. His words are absurd, yet they make a cruel kind of sense. Every burst above carves new wounds into the night. The canopy has holes now, where stars used to shine. Even when the barrage pauses, smoke lingers, blotting out constellations you once navigated by. You realize you cannot remember the last time you saw a clear horizon. Historians describe this transformation clinically. They write about how artillery fire filled the air with smoke, how tree bursts made dense forests unlivable. They talk about visibility, about how commanders struggled to see positions through haze. What they cannot capture is the feeling, the suffocating weight of a sky turned hostile. You are not just being shelled, you are being smothered. The strange part is how quickly your senses adapt. At first, the sudden flashes blinded you. Now your eyes expect them, flinching before each detonation. The darkness feels thicker afterward, pressing on your pupils. Your ears, too, have adjusted. The blasts no longer shock as much as the silences between them. Silence is heavier, almost unbearable. A quirky thought flits across your mind. You once read a tale where Norse gods split the skull of a giant to make the heavens. Tonight you feel as though the reverse is happening, that some unseen hand is splitting the sky to drop shards of bone onto you. War has a way of making mythology real in the worst possible sense. Ernst mutters something about digging deeper, but even he doesn't move to start. You all know it's pointless. The shrapnel falls vertically. Depth won't matter. The foxhole that once promised safety now feels like a funnel, directing every fragment inward. You imagine the Americans smiling across the line, proud of how they've turned your shelters into traps. The smoke thickens. You taste it on your tongue, acrid, bitter, clinging. Every breath scratches your throat. You pull your scarf higher, but it only filters, never removes. The forest itself seems to be dissolving. Trunks, split by blasts, smolder faintly, glowing embers against the snow. Branches hang like broken limbs. You can no longer tell where earth ends and air begins. Somewhere in the haze, a comrade cries out sharp, sudden, then cut short. You freeze, heart pounding, but the voice doesn't return. The silence after is worse than the scream. You exchange a glance with Wilhelm. His eyes are wide, reflecting the dim flashes, and you know he's thinking the same thing. It could just as easily have been you. The debate among historians often turns to morale. Did the proximity fuse break the German spirit more than tanks or aircraft? Some argue yes. Others say morale was already brittle. But here, crouched under the darkening sky, you feel the truth in your gut. This new weapon doesn't just wound bodies, it wounds hope. You stop believing in survival, even in silence. And yet, oddly, your mind searches for beauty. You notice how sparks drift through the smoke like fireflies. You notice the snowflakes, still falling, stubbornly white against the soot. You notice how the orange glow of bursts reflects in ice crystals, scattering tiny rainbows across the ground. For a heartbeat, it almost looks magical. Then another shell cracks open, and the magic is gone. Wilhelm mutters, "The Americans have stolen the sky." His words stick with you. You repeat them in your head, almost like a chant. It explains everything: the sense of exposure, the suffocating dread, the endless gray above. The Americans own the heavens now, and you are trapped beneath. The night drags on, endless. The flashes keep coming, sometimes near, sometimes far, but never gone. You crouch, eyes burning, ears ringing, your body trembling with exhaustion. The sky stays dark, and you know it will never feel safe again. You huddle tighter with the others, though the foxhole is barely wide enough for 3 men. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, you all feel the same truth. If death comes, it will find you together. That is the only comfort left in this forest of fire. The cold gnaws constantly, yet you realize fear burns hotter. Your heart pounds so hard you can feel it in your fingertips. Wilhelm's teeth chatter beside you, though you're not sure if it's from cold or nerves. Ernst clutches his rifle against his chest like a charm, whispering numbers under his breath. You almost envy his rhythm. It gives him something to hold on to, while the rest of you float in dread. Oddly, moments of quiet feel heavier than the barrages. The pauses stretch out, thick with uncertainty. You hear the creak of trees swaying, the drip of melted snow falling from shattered branches, the crunch of boots shifting restlessly. Each sound magnifies until the forest itself feels alive, waiting to betray you. The proximity fuse has made every man doubt the earth. Once, digging deep meant survival. Now, it only makes you a target. Some historians later claimed this was the true genius of the fuse, not just its lethality, but the way it destroyed soldierly faith in their own defenses. You can't argue with that. Your foxhole feels less like safety and more like a marked spot on a firing range. Wilhelm finally breaks the silence. Why do we stay? His whisper is raw. We could crawl back, find cover in the woods. You almost want to agree, but you know crawling into the open would only expose you more. The shell bursts are too wide, too precise. At least here, in this cursed hole, there's the illusion of a wall between you and the fragments. You shake your head, and he falls silent again. Quirky habits bloom in fear. One soldier ties a strip of cloth around his helmet, swearing it will help deflect shrapnel. Another lines his coat with newspaper he found in an abandoned house, claiming it absorbs fragments. You know none of it matters, yet you almost wish you had your own ritual. Fear makes even the absurd feel necessary. The Americans seem tireless. Their guns hammer out a tempo that never fully stops. You imagine them far behind the lines, crews swapping shifts, coffee steaming in tin cups, while their shells tear the forest apart. The thought makes your stomach twist with something worse than hunger envy. You chew the last scrap of bread from your ration, stale and cold, and wonder if they know how luxurious their war feels compared to yours. Historians still argue whether the Americans overused their artillery here. Some say they fired too much, wasting shells. Others claim it was the key to breaking your line. But crouched in your foxhole, you know the answer. There is no such thing as waste when each burst makes you flinch. When each burst steals another thread of courage, your comrades cling to small stories between barrages. Wilhelm murmurs about Munich spas, warm baths, the smell of soap. Ornst jokes about chocolate and women, though his voice cracks. You force a laugh, because pretending to be amused is easier than sitting in silence. The jokes are fragile shields, but even fragile shields matter. You close your eyes and think of home. You picture your family gathered around the radio, listening for news. Would they believe you if you told them foxholes have become death traps? That the very act of digging, once the symbol of soldiers' survival, has turned into a curse? Perhaps not. They picture you as safe underground, while you sit here with the sky itself falling on your head. Another barrage comes. The forest lights up, shadows leaping like mad dancers. Shrapnel whistles down. One fragment strikes the log beside you, embedding itself with a metallic thud. You stare at it, inches from your face, and feel your breath catch. Wilhelm whispers something frantic and grabs your arm, squeezing until your fingers go numb. When the noise fades, neither of you move for a long moment. Then comes silence again, the dreadful kind. You open your eyes slowly, and snowflakes drift down, glowing faintly in the moonlight that filters through the smoke. For once, what falls from above is harmless. You let one land on your palm, melting instantly into water. The contrast feels surreal, soft snow and hard steel, both descending from the same sky. The others settle, though no one truly relaxes. You can feel their fear in the tightness of their shoulders, in the way their eyes dart upward. You know your own eyes mirror theirs. The foxhole is cramped, damp, reeking of sweat and cordite, but it is all you have. And the knowledge that it can betray you at any moment is the weight that never lifts. Historians often describe battles in terms of maps, arrows, and dates. But you know the truth is here, in the cold earth, in the silence that suffocates, in the fragments that fall straight down. The truth is in the way men whisper jokes to keep their sanity. In the way snow feels like grace simply because it isn't metal. The emotional toll is relentless. You wonder how long you can keep counting barrages, how long before your mind simply refuses to keep track. You wonder if survival is less about luck and more about whether your nerves give out before the shrapnel finds you. The night stretches on, endless, and still you wait, shoulders pressed against comrades, eyes fixed on the sky you no longer trust. By now you understand that this war is no longer just about rifles, tanks, and men charging across fields. Something has shifted. The proximity fuse has rewritten the rules of combat, and you are living inside its lesson. You sit hunched in your foxhole, running your fingers over the grooves in your rifle. Once, this weapon gave you power. Point it, fire, defend yourself. But against shells bursting above, your rifle feels like a museum piece. This isn't soldier against soldier anymore. It's technology against the very idea of safety. The Americans have found a way to make the ground itself useless. Dig deeper, dig wider, none of it matters. Their shells bloom overhead, scattering fragments downward, punishing you for trusting the earth. Warfare has always been about adaptation, but you realize no tactic you know fits this. Historians later call it a revolution in firepower. Some compare the proximity fuse to the machine gun of the First World War, and invention that changed not just how men fought, but how they thought about fighting. Others debate whether the weapon was decisive in the Ardennes or simply sped up what was inevitable. You don't have the luxury of debate. You only have the experience of crouching, shivering, and listening to the sky split open. The quirky part is how tiny the change looks. A fuse no bigger than a light bulb, tucked into a shell. To the eye, nothing dramatic. Yet this small device has turned foxholes, the one thing soldiers trusted, into traps. You shake your head, still unable to believe that something so small could undo years of doctrine. Your comrades feel it too. They don't speak it aloud, but you see it in their posture. Helmets tilted too far forward, eyes always scanning upward. Even when the sky is quiet, they don't trust it anymore. One man mutters about trying to build wooden roofs over the foxholes, but another laughs bitterly. Wood won't stop steel falling like rain. You remember reading once about knights in armor who thought themselves invincible, until gunpowder proved otherwise. Maybe every war carries its moment when old defenses die. Maybe this is yours. Another shell bursts, scattering fragments that ping against helmets and soil. You duck lower, though you know it won't matter. Fear forces you down anyway. The earth trembles, then quiets again. Smoke drifts, mixing with snow, until the air tastes of ash. In the back of your mind, you realize this is bigger than just the art. If the Americans can use this here, they can use it everywhere. No foxhole, no trench, no bunker will ever feel the same again. Warfare has shifted into a new age, and you are trapped on the wrong side of the discovery. Oddly, that thought doesn't terrify you as much as it should. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's the numbness that follows too many barrages. But you find yourself thinking, this is how the future begins, not with grand speeches, but with soldiers like you crouching in holes, realizing their tricks no longer work. You lean your head against the frozen wall, closing your eyes. Around you, Wilhelm mutters a prayer. Ernst taps his helmet with his knuckles, as if testing its strength. Everyone invents their own ritual against a sky they no longer trust. The war has evolved, and you feel smaller than ever beneath it. Word count, 618. You can feel the shift along the line. The officers bark the same old orders: dig deeper, reinforce, hold your ground. but their voices carry less authority now. Everyone knows the truth. No matter how deep you burrow, the sky still finds you. The proximity fuse has made even the best dug foxholes little more than waiting rooms for fate. You kneel in the mud, chapped fingers clutching your rifle, and listen as the next salvo arcs overhead. The sound is unmistakable now. A faint whistle, a pause, and then crack. A burst in the air, scattering sparks and steel. Dirt rains down on your helmet. You press tighter into the wall, feeling the earth vibrate with each strike. Your chest aches from holding your breath. Adaptation is supposed to be the soldier's shield. When new tactics emerge, you adjust. When new weapons appear, you improvise. But what countermeasure exists when danger falls vertically, when the very act of hiding makes you vulnerable? You glance at Wilhelm, who's chewing on the edge of his glove like a nervous child. Ernst fiddles with a small crucifix, kissing it before tucking it under his collar. Everyone invents their own strategies, but none of them matter. Historians later argue about whether the Germans ever truly adapted. Some say makeshift overhead covers, logs, or scrap metal offered some protection. Others insist these were illusions at best, small comforts against something unstoppable. The truth, you suspect, is in between. Men tried everything because trying gave the mind hope. Even Ernst's crucifix, even Wilhelm's glove biting, they were forms of adaptation. Psychological armor when physical armor failed. The quirky details of survival pop up everywhere. One soldier insists on lying face down with his helmet tilted at an angle, convinced fragments will glance off. Another sprinkles snow over his foxhole, hoping the white cover will somehow fool American gunners. You almost laugh at the absurdity. Yet you catch yourself sprinkling snow over your own helmet anyway, just in case. Fear makes even nonsense feel reasonable. Another barrage begins. You grit your teeth, bracing as shrapnel hisses down. A piece strikes the rim of your foxhole, spinning off into the snow. You flinch so hard your neck cramps. When the noise fades, you force yourself to breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale, count to 5. You cling to rhythm because rhythm means control. However fragile, your officers tell you to conserve strength, to rest between barrages. But who can rest? The moment you close your eyes, your body jerks awake, convinced another shell is falling. Sleep feels like a luxury for men far from the front, for men who aren't listening to the sky tearing open above them. The Battle of the Bulge, you realize, isn't just a clash of tanks and infantry. It's a test of nerves. The Americans may have more shells, more food, more warmth, but their greatest weapon might be this constant pressure, this denial of rest. Every soldier has limits, and you feel yours thinning like thread stretched too far. You picture the war as a giant scale, one side weighed down by steel and supplies, the other by desperation and cold. With each proximity-fused shell, the balance tips further. It isn't dramatic, like tanks breaking through. It's quiet erosion, the kind that hollows men from the inside. Still, there's a stubborn streak in you. Even as you crouch under the sky's punishment, you tell yourself you'll endure. That's what soldiers do. You whisper it like a promise, I will endure. You don't know if it's true, but the words feel steadying, like a hand gripping yours in the dark. Historians often debate whether moments like this mattered, whether the endurance of individual soldiers changed the tide of battle. Some say no, pointing to fuel shortages and failed logistics as the real culprits. Others argue that morale, that willingness to hold even in hopeless holes, mattered more than supplies. You don't know the answer. You only know that for you, survival means refusing to break. The barrage ends again. Smoke drifts, snow falls, silence creeps back in. Wilhelm slumps against the wall, his breath rattling. Ernst still grips his crucifix, eyes glassy. You adjust your helmet and scan the dark canopy. You half expect another shell to burst, but for now, the heavens are quiet. You feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down. Yet beneath it, buried deep, is a strange clarity. The war has changed, and so have you. What was once about rifles and trenches is now about the mind, about enduring a weapon designed not just to wound the body, but to break the spirit. For tonight, at least, you're still here. And sometimes, in war, that's all the victory there is. You realize the worst damage isn't carved into the trees or the foxholes. It's etched into the minds of the men crouched around you. Each barrage takes a toll deeper than shrapnel ever could. You see it in Wilhelm's eyes, wide and glassy, darting to the sky even during silence. You hear it in Ernst's muttering, a steady string of prayers and numbers that sound more like a chant than coherent speech. Fear has settled into everyone's bones like frost. The constant anticipation gnaws at you. Even in stillness, your body tenses, braced for a noise that hasn't come yet. When it does, you jump anyway. It's not the explosions themselves that undo you, it's the waiting, the endless readiness. Some veterans call this nerves, but it feels more like a slow hollowing out, as though each blast scoops another piece of courage from your chest. Historians later debate whether proximity fuses were more devastating for their physical or psychological effect. The fragments killed, yes, but the true devastation came from stripping men of their faith in cover. You know firsthand that once a soldier stops trusting the earth, he never feels safe again. And a soldier who never feels safe fights with half a heart. Quirky behaviors keep appearing in your squad. One man insists on chewing pine needles because he swears the sharp taste keeps him alert. Another taps his helmet with a spoon before each barrage, a ritual to wake up the steel. Ernst invents little games, counting bursts, predicting intervals, pretending the sky is a clock. You know it's nonsense, but you don't stop him. Sometimes nonsense is the only rope keeping sanity tethered. You notice your own quirks too. You've started humming under your breath during shelling, though you don't recognize the tune. Maybe it's something from childhood. The vibrations in your throat mask the noise outside for a moment, and somehow that helps. You find yourself clinging to this habit, as if the hum itself is a barrier between you and the sky. Another salvo crashes overhead. You feel the shockwave push against your ribs, a giant hand squeezing your chest. Shrapnel rattles down, pinging off helmets, tearing through branches. Wilhelm lets out a broken laugh when a fragment embeds itself in a loaf of frozen bread he'd hidden in the corner. At least it won't go hungry, he says, voice cracking. You laugh too, because the absurdity is easier to bear than the fear. The psychological toll stretches into every thought. When the silence comes, you can't relax. You imagine shells still on their way. Imagine fragments slicing through the dark. You picture the Americans smiling over their guns, knowing exactly how rattled you are. Their confidence, their endless shells, their invisible sky weapons, it all presses down heavier than the snow. Some officers insist you must stay disciplined, stay sharp, hold the line, remember your training. Easy words shouted from dugouts further back, away from the airbursts. Out here, training feels like a ghost. You obey out of habit, not conviction. The truth is simple. Fear rules more than orders. Historians sometimes argue that German soldiers in the Ardennes broke not because of defeat in combat, but because of fatigue. Perhaps that's true. But you know fatigue isn't just from marching or hunger. It's from hours crouched in holes, waiting for a sky you cannot escape to open again. That's the fatigue that cracks bones from the inside. Oddly, you think of home again. You imagine your family looking at the winter sky, maybe grumbling about weather or admiring stars. You want to tell them the sky is not the same here. The sky is a predator. It watches and waits, then strikes without mercy. Would they believe you? Would anyone who hasn't crouched here understand? Another blast interrupts your thoughts. You flinch automatically, heart racing, though the fragments miss your hole this time. The ground trembles, smoke curls upward, and silence follows once more. Your body shakes, though you try to steady it. You tell yourself, endure a little longer. And yet you feel the truth pressing in. Every shell chips away at you. Every pause fills you with dread. The proximity fuse hasn't just changed the battle, it has changed you. You no longer think of safety the way you once did. You no longer believe in shelter. All you believe in now is endurance, fragile and fraying. The barrages keep coming, as if the Americans have an endless supply of shells and patience alike. Day bleeds into night, night into day, and you lose track of which is which. The bursts above are constant punctuation marks on a story that never ends. You measure time not by hours, but by the rhythm of artillery-long pauses, sudden flurries, stretches of silence that feel like traps before the next crack overhead. Sleep becomes impossible. Even when your body slumps against the dirt wall, exhaustion dragging you down, your nerves refuse to surrender. Each time your eyelids fall, some part of your brain jerks you awake again, certain another airburst is coming. The result is a kind of waking dream. You half exist, half listen, drifting in and out but never finding rest. The relentlessness wears on everyone. Wilhelm's face looks gaunt, his eyes rimmed in red. Ernst mutters, less now, too tired to keep his nervous rituals alive. Another comrade you barely know spends whole hours staring blankly at the mud, as though his soul has slipped out and left only a shell. No one jokes anymore. Even the absurd humor that once sparked in Foxholes has withered under the constant pressure. Historians later described this kind of barrage as morale erosion. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow grinding down of willpower. They point out that physical casualties often mattered less than the exhaustion artillery imposed. And sitting here, shoulders aching, head ringing, you understand exactly what they meant. The shells don't just wound bodies, they hollow out spirits. Quirky details still surface, though like weeds growing between cracks. One soldier insists the best way to rest is to stuff socks in his ears. Another swears chewing paper dulls the nerves. You catch yourself counting bursts again, humming under your breath when the silence feels unbearable. Each trick is flimsy, but it's something to cling to. The forest itself has become unrecognizable. Where once tall pines stood proudly, now only jagged stumps remain, scarred black by explosions. Smoke drifts constantly, caught in the branches that survive, turning the air into a permanent fog. Snow still falls, but it no longer looks pure. Each flake lands dirty, gray from ash and soot. Even nature seems exhausted, its beauty choked by fire. You remember when you first marched into the Ardennes? The landscape seemed endless in serene rolling hills, crisp air, the silence of snow underfoot. You thought it might be bearable, even peaceful, if not for the war. Now the same hills echo with endless blasts. The same snow hides fragments sharp enough to shred boots. The forest is no longer a backdrop. It is a casualty itself. the Americans never let up. Their artillery crews must rotate shifts, eating hot meals and resting in warmth while their guns continue to roar. You imagine them working like clockwork, mechanical, never tiring. The thought gnaws at you worse than hunger. You've chewed through the last crust of bread, sipped the last bitter coffee in your canteen, and still the guns come. Historians still debate whether the Americans overfired during the bulge, expending more shells than necessary. Some say their supply chains could afford it. Others argue it was wasteful. You don't see waste, you see strategy. Every blast above your head feels like another strike against your sanity. Even when no fragments hit you, the message is clear. They can keep this up forever, and you cannot. The relentlessness stretches you thin. Each man here carries the same hollow look, the same jitter in his hands. When silence comes, no one trusts it. You expect shells even in the stillness, flinching at the snap of a twig, the whisper of falling snow. Your nerves are frayed wires, sparking constantly, ready to snap, and yet, somehow, you remain. That is the cruel paradox. The Americans bombard you without pause, and still you survive, crouched in mud, too stubborn to collapse. Maybe it isn't courage, maybe it's habit, or fear of moving, or simply inertia. But you are still here, alive, in a war that seems intent on grinding you down. Oddly, you think of a phrase an officer once used, "Hold until relieved." You wonder if that will ever happen, or if the relief you wait for is simply the silence after your own last breath. You stare at the smoke-choked sky, listening for the next crack. It doesn't come yet. For a moment, only the snow falls. The barrages will start again. You know that, but for now, in this thin pause, you breathe. It is shallow, ragged, but it is breath. In war, sometimes that is all the victory left. You start to notice a pattern, not in the shells themselves, but in the way they arrive. The Americans are not firing blindly. Their artillery isn't random thunder. It feels aimed, almost personal. Each salvo seems to find the right cluster of trees, the right patch of ground. You begin to suspect they know exactly where you are. The thought gnaws at you. How could they possibly pinpoint foxholes hidden in the forest? Maybe scouts spotted you from the air. Maybe intercepted radio chatter betrayed your positions. Or maybe, you think grimly, they don't even need precision anymore. The proximity fuse makes accuracy less important. Bursting high, it doesn't matter if a shell lands a few meters short or long. It will still rain fragments onto heads and helmets. Historians would later call this area saturation, artillery that punished entire zones rather than specific trenches. The Americans had turned science into strategy. Instead of chasing soldiers into holes, they simply burned the air above them. Commanders called it efficiency. You call it cruelty. You glance upward as another burst cracks open. A jagged piece whistles down, striking the dirt wall beside your shoulder. It sticks there, still hot, steaming faintly in the snow. You stare at it, realizing how easily that shard could have found your chest instead. You can smell the scorched soil, the faint tang of burned metal. Wilhelm stares too, then mutters, "They know where we are." His voice is flat, more resigned than afraid. Ernst shakes his head. "No, they don't. They just don't have to." You don't know which is worse, that the Americans have somehow found your exact coordinates, or that their weapons are so advanced they don't even need to. The precision of their strategy weighs heavily. You've heard officers explain how American artillery units coordinate by radio, adjusting fire in minutes. German guns, by contrast, often wait for longer calculations. for orders pass down slowly. The difference is time. The Americans strike quickly, relentlessly, with fuses that guarantee impact. You realize your line isn't just outgunned, it's outpaced. A quirky rumor spreads between men. Someone swears the shells can smell soldiers, like hunting dogs in the sky. You know it's nonsense, yet you don't laugh. The accuracy feels uncanny enough to believe anything. Fear makes imagination fertile. Another salvo erupts. Fragments rain down in metallic sheets. You press your helmet low, shoulders hunched, ears ringing. When it passes, you find your hands trembling uncontrollably. You clench your fists, trying to stop the shaking, but it continues anyway. The strategy is working, not just on the battlefield, but inside you. You feel yourself unraveling. You used to think of survival in clear terms. Keep your rifle clean, dig deep, follow orders. Now survival feels like luck, nothing more. The Americans don't aim at you. They aim at the very concept of shelter, erasing the idea that you could hide. Historians later argue that the proximity fuse was one of the Allies' most important secret weapons. Some say it shortened the war by months. Others question whether its psychological impact mattered more than its physical destruction. Sitting here, shoulders aching under the weight of dread, you know the answer. It does both. It kills men and breaks them before they die. The quirky detail that stays with you is how small the difference looks. A fuse the size of a light bulb slipped into a shell. That's it. No massive tank, no roaring aircraft, just a tiny invention that flips the balance of war. You imagine the American engineers celebrating in warm labs, never knowing how their success feels on your end. The shelling slows again, leaving the forest shrouded in haze. Smoke curls between shattered trunks. Snow falls through the holes where branches used to be. You lift your head just enough to see the sky glowing faintly with fire. It looks like a ceiling painted with embers. Wilhelm sighs, slumping against the wall. They're not even aiming anymore, he mutters. You don't correct him. Whether they aim or not doesn't matter. The result is the same. Foxholes turned into traps, soldiers turned into targets, morale turned into dust. You realize the truth with a bitter clarity. The Americans aren't just winning by numbers, they're winning by design. Their artillery isn't merely pounding you, it's reshaping the battlefield itself. You are not fighting men anymore. You are fighting a system, a machine that feeds shells endlessly, each one smarter than the last. And yet you feel the truth pressing in. Every shell chips away at you. Every pause fills you with dread. The proximity fuse hasn't just changed the battle, it has changed you. You no longer think of safety the way you once did. You no longer believe in shelter. All you believe in now is endurance, fragile and fraying. The barrages keep coming, as if the Americans have an endless supply of shells and patience alike. Day bleeds into night, night into day, and you lose track of which is which. The bursts above are constant punctuation marks on a story that never ends. You measure time not by hours, but by the rhythm of artillery-long pauses, sudden flurries, stretches of silence that feel like traps before the next crack overhead. Sleep becomes impossible. Even when your body slumps against the dirt wall, exhaustion dragging you down, your nerves refuse to surrender. Each time your eyelids fall, some part of your brain jerks you awake again, certain another airburst is coming. The result is a kind of waking dream. You half exist, half listen, drifting in and out but never finding rest. The relentlessness wears on everyone. Wilhelm's face looks gaunt, his eyes rimmed in red. Ernst mutters, less now, too tired to keep his nervous rituals alive. Another comrade you barely know spends whole hours staring blankly at the mud, as though his soul has slipped out and left only a shell. No one jokes anymore. Even the absurd humor that once sparked in Foxholes has withered under the constant pressure. Historians later described this kind of barrage as morale erosion. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow grinding down of willpower. They point out that physical casualties often mattered less than the exhaustion artillery imposed. And sitting here, shoulders aching, head ringing, you understand exactly what they meant. The shells don't just wound bodies, they hollow out spirits. Quirky details still surface, though like weeds growing between cracks. One soldier insists the best way to rest is to stuff socks in his ears. Another swears chewing paper dulls the nerves. You catch yourself counting bursts again, humming under your breath when the silence feels unbearable. Each trick is flimsy, but it's something to cling to. The forest itself has become unrecognizable. Where once tall pines stood proudly, now only jagged stumps remain, scarred black by explosions. Smoke drifts constantly, caught in the branches that survive, turning the air into a permanent fog. Snow still falls, but it no longer looks pure. Each flake lands dirty, gray from ash and soot. Even nature seems exhausted, its beauty choked by fire. You remember when you first marched into the Ardennes? The landscape seemed endless in serene rolling hills, crisp air, the silence of snow underfoot. You thought it might be bearable, even peaceful, if not for the war. Now the same hills echo with endless blasts. The same snow hides fragments sharp enough to shred boots. The forest is no longer a backdrop. It is a casualty itself. The Americans never let up. Their artillery crews must rotate shifts, eating hot meals and resting in warmth while their guns continue to roar. You imagine them working like clockwork, mechanical, never tiring. The thought gnaws at you worse than hunger. You've chewed through the last crust of bread, sipped the last bitter coffee in your canteen, and still the guns come. Historians still debate whether the Americans overfired during the Bulge, expending more shells than necessary. Some say their supply chains could afford it. Others argue it was wasteful. You don't see waste, you see strategy. Every blast above your head feels like another strike against your sanity. Even when no fragments hit you, the message is clear. They can keep this up forever, and you cannot. The relentlessness stretches you thin. Each man here carries the same hollow look, the same jitter in his hands. When silence comes, no one trusts it. You expect shells even in the stillness, flinching at the snap of a twig, the whisper of falling snow. Your nerves are frayed wires, sparking constantly, ready to snap, and yet, somehow, you remain. That is the cruel paradox. The Americans bombard you without pause, and still you survive, crouched in mud, too stubborn to collapse. Maybe it isn't courage, maybe it's habit, or fear of moving, or simply inertia, but you are still here, alive, in a war that seems intent on grinding you down. Oddly, you think of a phrase an officer once used, "Hold until relieved." You wonder if that will ever happen, or if the relief you wait for is simply the silence after your own last breath. You stare at the smoke-choked sky, listening for the next crack. It doesn't come yet. For a moment, only the snow falls. The barrages will start again. You know that, but for now, in this thin pause, you breathe. It is shallow, ragged, but it is breath. In war, sometimes that is all the victory left. You start to notice a pattern, not in the shells themselves, but in the way they arrive. The Americans are not firing blindly. Their artillery isn't random thunder. It feels aimed, almost personal. Each salvo seems to find the right cluster of trees, the right patch of ground. You begin to suspect they know exactly where you are. The thought gnaws at you. How could they possibly pinpoint foxholes hidden in the forest? Maybe scouts spotted you from the air. Maybe intercepted radio chatter betrayed your positions. Or maybe, you think grimly, they don't even need precision anymore. The proximity fuse makes accuracy less important. Bursting high. It doesn't matter if a shell lands a few meters short or long. It will still rain fragments onto heads and helmets. Historians would later call this area saturation, artillery that punished entire zones rather than specific trenches. The Americans had turned science into and so you crouch lower, helmet tight, waiting for the next crack overhead. The strategy is working. For the first time in what feels like forever, the guns grow quiet. Not just a pause between salvos, but an actual slowing minutes without a burst, then more minutes. The silence feels foreign, like stepping into a room where all the clocks have stopped. You straighten slowly, unsure if you should trust it. The forest breathes again. Snow drifts gently through the smoke, settling on shattered branches. The smell of cordite fades slightly, replaced by the clean bite of winter air. Your shoulders ache from hours of tension, but you dare to stretch them. Around you, the men do the same nervous glances exchanged. Small movements made cautiously, as though any sudden sound might trigger the sky to split again. It is a fragile moment of peace. Wilhelm leans back, closing his eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Ernst pulls out a scrap of paper and pencil, scribbling something hurriedly, perhaps a letter he'll never send. You simply sit still, listening to the faint creak of trees. For the first time in hours, you hear nature again. The crack of branches under snow, the distant call of a bird startled into flight. Simple sounds, yet they feel miraculous. Historians sometimes describe these pauses as false dawns. Artillery rarely stopped for long. Silence was just the prelude to more fire. But soldiers cherished them. Even a few minutes without explosions gave bodies a chance to unclench, gave minds a chance to breathe. You feel it now, relief spreading through your chest, though you know it cannot last. You look around at the foxholes scattered nearby. Some are empty, their owners gone whither, fallen, fled, or buried. You don't know. Others still hold huddled figures, men with eyes too wide, men rocking back and forth as though trying to lull themselves to sleep. The forest floor is littered with fragments glinting in the snow, souvenirs of the sky's betrayal. A quirky scene plays out. One soldier near you lights a cigarette with trembling fingers. The flame flares, small and defiant against the darkness. He inhales deeply, coughing, then passes it to another. For a moment, the cigarette is more than tobacco wits, a ritual, a fragile symbol that life still exists here. You almost envy them, though you have no cigarette of your own. The silence stretches, and with it comes the dangerous luxury of thought. You think of home again, of familiar streets and voices. You imagine your family sitting at a warm table, unaware that their son crouches in a forest where foxholes have turned into coffins. You want to tell them about this, about how war changes rules in an instant, how safety becomes danger with the twist of a fuse. But even if you lived to tell them, would they understand? Historians argue over how soldiers endured moments like this. Some claim camaraderie carried men through, that shared suffering created bonds stronger than fear. Others say endurance came from rituals, letters, prayers, jokes. You think both are true. Tonight you survive, not because you are brave, but because Wilhelm whispers prayers. Ernst scribbles notes, and someone shares a cigarette across the line. Endurance, it seems, is stitched together by small human acts. You draw a slow breath, realizing how foreign stillness feels after hours of chaos. The forest almost looks beautiful again. Smoke drifts like mist, snow softens the broken ground, and the stars, faint but real, peek through ragged holes in the canopy. For a fleeting moment, you allow yourself to believe the shelling is done, but deep down, you know better. The Americans haven't tired. They haven't run out of shells. This is only an intermission, a pause before the curtain rises again on the same deadly play. And yet, in this fragile lull, you let your body loosen, your eyes rest, your breath steady. For however long it lasts, you let peace exist, even if it is just a trick. Because in war, sometimes a few stolen minutes of silence feel like victory. When the next barrage finally comes, it doesn't feel like an attack, it feels like confirmation of what you already knew. The silence was never permanent. It was only a curtain pulled back to reveal the same stage, the same actors, the same relentless pounding from the sky. You flinch at the first crack overhead, though part of you expected it. Snow bursts upward in a dirty spray as fragments hiss down, sparks glowing briefly before fading into the ash-gray ground. This time, you notice something different. You aren't just watching the shells or the fragments, you're watching your comrades. The way their bodies jerk with each blast, the way their hands tighten around rifles they'll never fire, the way their eyes glaze as though they've already retreated into themselves. You realize the shells are no longer aimed just at your foxholes. They are aimed at your spirit. The aftermath becomes clearer with every pause. Men slump lower, movements slower. The forest, once filled with chatter and nervous jokes, has fallen almost silent. A few muttered prayers, a cough here and there, the rustle of someone shifting their weight, that's all that remains. It is as though the barrage has sucked the life out of the air, leaving only shells and silence behind. And now, in the quiet moments, comes the cost. You lift your head slowly, scanning the foxholes near yours. Some are empty now, not from desertion, but from absence, the kind that means a man has fallen and been carried away, or simply buried where he sat. You realize you can no longer count how many comrades you've lost. The proximity fuse doesn't leave obvious craters, but its toll is scattered across the line in ways you can't ignore. Helmets dented, coats torn, eyes shut forever. Wilhelm sits slumped beside you, his face gray in the faint light. His breath comes shallow, each inhale rattling. He hasn't spoken in hours. Ernst, by contrast, mutters constantly, scribbling in that scrap of paper whenever he can. Perhaps he's writing to his family, or maybe just scribbling nonsense to occupy his hands. Everyone copes in their own way, and you've stopped judging. The cost of war is measured in bodies, yes, but also in the erosion of everything else: hope, energy, even memory. You try to recall what day it is, what hour. You can't. You only know the rhythm of barrages. Time has collapsed into a cycle of bursts and silences, fragments and dread. Historians later counted the losses from these days. Neat numbers written in books: how many fell, how many captured, how many wounded. But you know the truth is messier. The true cost is in the hollowness you see in the faces around you, in the way silence feels heavier than explosions, in the knowledge that foxholes, once your last shield, have become your cage. A quirky thought surfaces. You remember a story from your school days about medieval castles, how defenders poured boiling oil over attackers, to punish them for daring to dig beneath the walls. You think, bitterly, that the Americans have found their modern boiling oil, raining it straight down into the holes you once trusted. The comparison almost makes you laugh, though the sound sticks in your throat. You think again of the engineers behind this weapon. Did they imagine this? Did they picture young men crouched in mud, realizing their safest place had become their death trap? Or did they only picture diagrams, trajectories, test fields with balloons? Maybe they celebrated the invention without ever hearing what it sounded like inside a foxhole. Another shell bursts, this one close enough to sting your skin with heat. Wilhelm doesn't even flinch anymore. He just stares blankly upward, as if daring the next one to hit him. The cost is written in that stare, in the way fear has calcified into numbness. You know if he survives the night, he will carry that stare forever. The debate among historians will always be whether technology or logistics truly decided battles. Was it the fuel shortages that doomed Germany? Was it the American factories that churned out endless shells? Or was it the single innovation of the proximity fuse that tilted morale so sharply? Scholars will write papers for decades, weighing numbers and evidence. But here, in the Ardennes, crouched in dirt, you already know the answer. It all blends together. Hunger, gnaws, cold bites, shells, rain, and the fuse makes it all inescapable. You close your eyes and think of home again. You wonder how to explain this to your family if you ever return. How do you tell them that war isn't just bullets and tanks, but silence that feels heavier than sound? How do you tell them that the sky itself betrayed you? That the cost wasn't just your comrades, but the way you no longer believe in safety? You open your eyes and watch the snow fall. For a fleeting moment, the flakes are white, untouched by soot or sparks. They fall softly on helmets, on rifles, on the wreckage of the forest. They remind you of winters before the war, of sleds and laughter and fireside warmth. And then another burst cracks above, and the flakes vanish into smoke. The cost of war, you realize, isn't measured in victories or defeats. It's measured in the way snow no longer feels pure. It's measured in foxholes that no longer mean survival. It's measured in the hollow silence between shells. When you realize you are no longer the same person you were before, you shift your weight, pulling your coat tighter. Around you, the men sit quietly, shadows among shadows. The barrage will come again, and with it, more fragments, more silence, more cost. But for now, you breathe, and that is something. The Ardennes has taken much, and it will take more before dawn. And now, as the shells fade in memory and the forest sinks into shadow, you feel your body loosen. The tension that wound itself so tightly around your chest begins to ease. You let the image of the snow linger the way flakes drifted down in silence. The way they seemed pure, even against a backdrop of smoke and ruin. It's strange how small details endure when grand events blur. You may not remember each barrage, each burst above the foxholes, but you will remember the snow. You will remember the sound of Ernst's muttering, Wilhelm's ragged breathing, the cigarette glowing briefly in another man's trembling hands. These are the fragments of memory that outlast explosions. Your thoughts stretch outward, away from the foxhole, beyond the forest, beyond even the war. You picture the stars shining faintly above the haze, steady and eternal. They do not care who fights, who falls, who survives. They shine anyway. And in that thought lies a strange kind of comfort. You breathe more slowly now, letting your body sink into the rhythm of quiet. The war rages on, yes, but for you, the story tonight is ending. You allow yourself to fade gently from the foxhole, to to step back from the fragments and the fear. You hold onto the snow, the silence, the faint stars overhead dot, so, as you close your eyes, remember this: even in the darkest battles, even when the sky itself turns against you, there is still quiet to be found. There is still snow to soften the ground, still stars to remind you of eternity, and tonight you are safe here, in this moment. The shells are gone, the lights are dim, and the story has come to rest.